Hello, Gunda.
Hello, Ruth. Welcome.
Thank you. And it's great to see your rooms here in Totnes.
Yes.
And thank you for talking to me.
You are very welcome.
So how did you first encounter the Alexander technique? What were the circumstances at the time? What did you do? Where were you? How did that happen?
It is interesting for everybody. In my case, I had a history of scoliosis throughout my childhood. So from the age of 7, I was taken around all sorts of physios by my mother, who noticed that something wasn't quite right, and the way I was running, my foot was turning out all the time, and that kind of thing. And then that finally led to her actually coming up with the idea of going to a couple of Alexander technique lessons.
Oh.
And we both went.
That's great.
So she had 3 lessons and I had 3 lessons. And I think it's 40 years ago. So I was perhaps 19, something like that. And all I remember of that is that the teacher said, you can change that. So if you imagine somebody going through from one physio to the other, I experienced traction, I experienced hanging on bars, all sorts of things. I wore things in my shoe, all sorts of things.
Oh dear.
And then somebody says, you can change that. But the funny thing is that he also said, because at the time I was studying drama at Manchester University, so it was in a holiday when I went there. He said, oh, stop doing that dance class that you're doing.
Oh.
And so, but the thing was, I wasn't really able to do the dance class anyway because of my big scoliosis and lack of coordination. Yeah. And typical 19-year-old was going, I'm not going to stop doing my dance class. And I also didn't have the money to carry on back in Manchester. But the very interesting thing that I did notice is that I stopped the dance class anyway 2 weeks later because I actually couldn't do it. And I think I had enough self-knowledge to realize I'd done that.
Yeah.
So I realized that I'd thought I won't carry on because I don't want to stop the dance class, but then I hadn't been able to keep up with it anyway. So that must have stuck, because then fast forward some years and I was then living in Berlin, working in the theatre, because I worked in the theatre and doing all sorts of things. I was basically theatre directing, but I did all sorts. Like assistant directing, stage managing, lighting, props, all sorts.
How did you come to Berlin?
Well, I came to Berlin because when I finished studying drama, you to get work in the theatre, you need an equity card. But there are those times, and it's even similar now, but it was very difficult to get an equity card. In fact, you could only get an equity card if you'd already had 2 contracts. But you couldn't get any contracts without an equity card.
Exactly, that's typical.
Oh, yeah. So it was really, really obvious that there were only a few routes in. So one of them, dare I say it, women did know they could sleep with somebody, which obviously was not something I was going to entertain. But it's interesting thinking backwards to how acceptable that was considered to be at that time as a route. The other way in was theatre and education. And the other way in was to go abroad to Europe and to get a job where it was slightly easier because theatre wasn't so centralized. So, for example, in Germany, all the main cities had a lot of different theatres.
Yeah.
So there were many more opportunities. And then if you became a member of the equivalent union, you could then flip it back into being in equity. So that took me to Germany. And I went to work in the Altes Schauspielhaus in Stuttgart as an assistant director. And from there I went to Munich and lived in Munich for 8 months and was working in various theatre ways, different things, including one of the things that was probably very relevant to why I ended up training, because one of the things I did at one point was follow spotting. So it was an opera, and there was a situation in the opera where the main character ran on stage and jumped and landed lying horizontal and was carried around the stage by loads of other people. And my job was to, as he ran on stage, to catch his head in just his head lit and follow him around with a follow spot for about half an hour.
Oh.
Which is like a sight line with a gun. So you're looking down a sight line to get that. But basically, every evening I was absolutely rigid by the end of the follow. Yeah. And again, I was thinking, it shouldn't be like this, you know. And the other thing to say is because of my scoliosis, that's the reason I'd gone off the acting and more onto backstage work.
Okay.
Yeah, because obviously if you've got a noticeable scoliosis, you quite rarely would be picked for the, you know, the main theatre roles and so on. But so that perhaps took me more into backstage and then to directing. So, you know, basically it had dogged me all my life with the scoliosis and the back pain. And I
so
didn't,
you had already pain.
I was all the time throughout my childhood. I don't think I really knew what it was like to be comfortable.
Oh.
So you can see I am one of those people who came to the technique because of a back issue.
Yeah.
But what then happened, I moved from Munich to Berlin, and then I was working on tour with La Bohème, and we were going into old steelworks and taking it around mining places and on tour in various big old industrial buildings with a 52-person orchestra, and I was being sent ahead to open up for the first time in 40 years in old steelworks and make it ready for performance in 2 days. All these impossible things. And suddenly one of the tours fell through. So we were working 2 weeks of every month on tour, and one of them fell through. So I had a 6-week gap when I was paid. But I have to backpedal a little bit because I actually had a boyfriend at the time who, similarly to me, was incredibly bent over, had a lot of asthma, a lot of issues.
Oh.
We were merrily very rounded together. and we knew it. And it was quite funny. So anyway, so one day he said, I've had enough of all this asthma and all this stuff. And I was washing up and I said, oh, the thing that works is the Alexander technique. And I thought, why did I say that? I don't know why I said that.
Wow.
So I really don't know why I said that. So, but anyway, he was the kind of person that acted on his decisions. And he went off and had lessons with Danny McGowan, who was in Berlin at the time, training the first lot of students through in Berlin. And they had put themselves together and advertised for a teacher to come out and train them. And that was Danny.
Oh.
So my then boyfriend went and had lessons. And I can remember it absolutely to this day as I was sitting at the kitchen table and he was changing. And he was really changing. And I was feeling worse and worse. And I was going, oh no, I've sent him to the thing that I needed to do. But now it's his thing. And I can't interrupt, you know, his enthusiasm and make it my thing. But then I had this gap of 6 weeks where one of the tours fell through. And I did go and have lessons with Danny. And I knew within the first lesson that I wanted to train.
Oh, wow.
And the reason why was because I was already so interested in body language, because that's, you know, I'd been doing everything to be a really great theatre director. I was obsessively watching body language and people all of the time. And I had a stubbed toe when I went to my lesson with Danny, and I didn't tell him. And he wiggled all my toes except for the one that I'd stubbed. And I thought, if he can tell by my musculature which toe to miss out, I'm training.
Wow.
So that's my story. That's how I then trained.
So together with having lessons, you immediately decided to train.
I decided to train immediately, and I had to kind of negotiate it with my then boyfriend. He was also training to be a doctor and a homeopath at the time. But he was at the time considering training, but he then went off that. And then I went off and spent a year earning before I started.
Yeah.
And I went to Bonn and I worked for the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, which is an organization set up by by England, I think the UK, in Germany after the war to help maintain democracy in Germany. Yeah. And so I worked there for a year, and it was things like there was a political theatre festival that I was working for and answering lots of letters about queries of political issues and things. And that's how I saved my first year. And then I went back and I had lessons with someone else in Cologne called Charles Bacon, who I really did rate as well as a teacher. And Charles is one of those ones who thought he was rubbish all the way through his training, stayed on a lot longer and actually became a really brilliant teacher because he thought he wasn't very good at it. But I think he probably did double the time before he qualified. And I remember that vividly as well, that I was thinking, you're really good though, and you don't think you are.
When was that? Starting the training? Or?
So I started to train in 93. So I then went back to Berlin and started the training. And I trained from 1993 to 1996.
How many students were there?
It was a big school. There were 14 in my group. There had been, I think, 14 through already in 3 years. And then after that, Danny took on another 14 and an afternoon class as well of 6.
Yeah.
So he did 3, they all went through, we were all the same year group together. Oh. So he went through 3 years, another 3 years, and then 2 classes over the next 3 years, over the 9-year period.
Okay. And the other schools in Berlin didn't exist at the time?
No, they didn't exist at the time. That all happened afterwards. At the time, he was the only school in Berlin. And so I was really into it, and I was working my way through, then flipped to doing youth theatre work through the time of the training.
While you were training?
While I was training, because because you can't really work with, the hours didn't work alongside the training. So I was very lucky. I got a job where they just gave me completely free reign over what hours I did.
Wow.
They said, we'll pay you this a month. All you have to do is at the end of the year, you have to have produced at least 2 big theatre projects with the young people of Friedrichshain in Berlin. And so that's what I did. Can
you maybe talk a little bit about your experiences during the training? How was your process?
Well, it was astonishing. I mean, the first thing that happened was that I was falling asleep on my feet. In the first term, I seemed to just get exhausted. And then I found myself really having very strange experiences, actually, that were quite odd. Sometimes things felt like they were going into slow motion. My perception was playing around. I was having really odd experiences, and it was quite disconcerting. But luckily, Danny was quite reassuring about that and properly explained that you can have strange sensations and experiences. I don't know if I now think back to it, I think, well, maybe I was being so enthusiastic. I was doing things like trying to inhibit everything that I ever believed about how anything worked. So I decided I had no clue how the world worked. I had no clue whether the whole way we believed things to be were actually true. And so I was really, so that's probably why I began to have odd experiences.
Quite serious about it.
I was just, I believed that we actually carry so many preconceived ideas.
We do.
And so many structural ideas about how human beings are, or what's objective or what's not, or, even what consciousness is, all of those things. So I was really very enthusiastic from the word go and then exploring it. And then I suppose what I could say as well is that the training was really great at that time, in the sense that because there were so many students, we did have a visiting teacher every 6 weeks. So, I've got many memories of really great visiting teachers. Favorite one was George Coltad, I think he's called, who people call the master of inhibition. And he really just would move, slightest movement of the arm, and you would notice you were still helping, and all those sorts of things. And then, and 2 of my favorite guest teachers now work at my school here. So Trisha is our moderator here at Alexander Technique Training Southwest. And I can tell you a funny story with Trisha, if you like. So Trisha came, Trisha Hemingway, this is. She came as a guest teacher, and she gave me a lesson. We always had lessons with the guest teachers. And I was sitting there thinking, she's saying something different from Danny. I don't like it. She's saying something different. It's not what I think. I think what Danny says. And suddenly, Trisha moved behind the table, the teaching table in the room, and said, I'm just protecting myself from your thoughts.
That's so Trisha.
And I thought, what was I thinking? And I thought, I was thinking, I don't like this. I don't like what she's saying. It's all different from Danny. And again, it was one of those big moments for me, actually, because I realized that my thoughts had been actually quite strong and sort of, rejecting of what she was doing. So it turned into a really good experience. So, and Trisha is now still this wonderful force in our school and in my life. We've danced around each other's lives, actually, for many years. We kept working in similar areas for years without crossing over and having the same pupils. And now she's such a wonderful support for me in the training course.
I met her once in Slovenia.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, and one of my other favourite guest teachers now also works at Alexander Technique Training Southwest, and that's a deliberate thing because she's called Shelly Parry, and Shelly was also a favourite guest teacher while I was training. She so down to earth and had worked with murderers and nuns and just taught it, and she actually, I think she got me thinking about widening somehow and really being practical about daily life, So I've always been aware of her, and she now works as our Bristol lead for the school.
Yeah.
So I do what I can to bring back the more experienced teachers into the school that's now running,
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so that was my training. It really did involve a lot of guest teachers.
So he didn't have any assistants that were there all the time, but visiting teachers who came for a while?
No, he did as well, because it was a big school. So his main assistant was Irma Weber, who has took over his school when he left Berlin. Yeah. So Irma had been a tower of strength in the German world of Alexander, I think, organizing many of the get-togethers. And so Irma was fantastic, actually, as his named assistant. And then we also had Elisabeth Moll, also fantastic. She was there once a week. And someone called André Thériault. He's a French-Canadian teacher who's now in Paris, working in Paris. All of them very, very good and really good experience, I learned a lot from all of them, really, Yeah.
Okay, so, and then you graduated at some point.
Yes. And then my life took a turn I wasn't expecting, which is because I thought I would go and take it back into theatre work. So what I thought is that I was learning more. What I really thought was, if you want to be a really good theatre director, you need to get older in an interesting way. And you need to get life experience and not just theatre life experience. Because there's too many people in the theatre who are basically regurgitating the experiences of the theatre world.
Yeah.
They sort of live in a bubble.
Yeah.
But so I was intending to take it back into theatre work. But then Danny asked me to work at the school. So I ended up, and by that time I was so fascinated by the technique and the body language aspect of it. So I then worked at the school in the morning, 2 mornings a week, and in the afternoon class, which he had another class. But there is an interesting story there as well, because he did create the afternoon class thinking that he would give me an opportunity to do what Emil did, which was be alongside him every day. And there were about another 14 people who wanted to train.
Wow.
But I suddenly thought, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was that the minute I thought that, within a week, out of the 14, 8 decided not to. So it was one of those things where that decision not to do it, people all dropped away. And but Danny, there were still 6 left. And so Danny went ahead and did the second class in the afternoon, which was too much for him.
Yeah.
And I suppose it was difficult to turn away the 6. But I had decided I wasn't ready to be a constant everyday assistant. I wasn't at that point. And STAT doesn't really want people to be a main assistant for the first 3 years.
Yeah.
But Danny always said, and I do agree with him in some ways, that the job of a training course teacher is different from the job of a normal teacher. So people do need to practice that. But it's different being the rookie teacher in a big team or being the named assistant. And what I would say is that Omel was a bit of an exception, because Omel's skill as a tango teacher and a tango dancer was so high. And Omel's ability to maintain and understand every nuance of all the handwork was extremely high. And I think I did need longer. So I would say that the first 3 years I worked on the training course, 2 mornings a week and 1 or 2 afternoons a week, it was more like I was the rookie teacher amongst a more experienced team, building my skills.
Yeah.
And I think that was right for me. So it was a bit like having 6 years of training, really, you know? And I think I really appreciate that, to be honest. That was probably what I needed, you know?
Yeah.
I just had a very different starting point, if you think of my scoliosis and things, you know?
At the time, did you still do the youth theatre, or did you actually only work at the Alexander School?
So towards the end and probably into the first year of teaching, or maybe the first few months actually even, I was running a building. It was a youth culture building with another person. There were a team of 20 of us, and it was basically had a theatre, it had studios, it had music studio, it had a costume cupboard, it had all of these things. And so we did a lot of projects with that. But I didn't do that for very long, because I did then actually start working straight away. I started teaching straight away.
Yeah.
And in fact, as soon as I had finished training, Danny sent me over to America. So in my first summer after qualifying, there's a place in America called Wisdom's Goldenrod, which is the place of the Paul Brunton Foundation. Mm-hmm. And Paul Brunton was a journalist who decided to look into the truth of all sorts of spiritual thinking. And he traveled the world, probably in the 60s or 70s at that time, investigating the Maharishis and the yogis and going into Egypt, into the pyramids and all these things. And Danny, he collected a lot of wisdom and put it into books. And this was somebody who Danny rated a lot. And there was this center in New York State, in Ithaca, where Danny had been, and where a lot of them wanted to learn the Alexander technique.
Oh.
But Danny was working here in Dartington at the music school in the summer. So he sent me over there straight after I'd qualified. And I was there for 4 or 5 weeks, teaching 7 or 8 lessons a day to these really strong meditators.
Oh, wow.
And it was hilarious, because they would walk in the room and it would be going like, all this energy coming off them. And I was thinking, I'm not sure there's much I can teach these people, but oh well, they want to know, let's give it a go. So I was there for that time, and I was thrown in the deep end. He threw me in the deep end.
Wow.
And so from then on, I always taught from then on. There's only 2 short hiatuses in teaching since I qualified, and one was when my kids were born. My twins were born in 2002. I didn't teach maybe for 3/4 of a year, and then I taught about 1 or 2 lessons a week for a while, and then up to 3 or 4, and then up to 4 or 5. So basically, that was the time when I was doing a bit less, but I was teaching
a very little bit less.
Only a little bit less, and that's actually just to do with my financial circumstances. So I've always needed to teach to survive. So that's one of the things that always kept me going on, pushing to actually find pupils. And I think it's given me a lot of experience about how to get pupils or how it works.
So besides working in the school, you also built up your own practice?
I had my own practice in Berlin, yes. Yes.
And how did that work when, it was probably not very well known at the time?
Yeah, I did a lot of workshops.
Okay.
So I did workshops for physiotherapists. I did workshops for dentists. I did workshops in a place to link it with the environmental studies. I called it personal ecology and linked it with that. I did just plain normal introductory workshops. And I taught at the Volkshochschule in Dresden once every other week. That was a bit similar. There was a whole bunch of people there who wanted a teacher. In fact, they looked for a teacher and they just happened to ring me up. And so I went there every other week and taught the Volkshochschule courses. That was a Friday and Saturday workshop. And then they all had lessons and I came every 2 weeks then to there.
Yeah.
From Berlin to Dresden.
So your theatre experience probably helped you a lot with that, running workshops and speaking in front of people and all that.
Yes, I do think that helped a lot.
Organizing.
Yes. I think that's something that people should actually understand about the technique, is that the other knowledge that you have in your life is something that you do want to combine with it. Because people do have skills. Without those skills of running workshops and that kind of thing, I think I'd have had a harder time to get busy, you know?
Yeah.
Especially in Germany where people didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know. Just being able to speak to people and being willing to do that. Being used to doing it.
Having the personality to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is people who would know me well would know that it doesn't mean you're not shy inside. It just means you're practiced at it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You just know how to do it because you've done it a lot. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I talk to people, you know, and I did notice that when I ran workshops together with another teacher, which we did quite a lot, somebody called Sabine Melzer, who was a physio, and then she trained alongside me. We ran the physio workshops together because she had the physio background as well. But what I really noticed is if you run workshops with more than one person, people don't know who to go to for lessons. So they kind of say, I'm really, really interested. I'll definitely get in touch with you, but they don't sign up straight away. If you manage it on your own and you do it on your own, even with a larger group, you're more likely that they will come to you because there's no feeling of, I don't want to say to them, I like this one better than that one. Or, you know. So I got quite experienced at that kind of thing, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where I was going.
So how long did you stay in Berlin and why did you then move and where?
So one of the things I think I will speak about is that I did really notice that the community of Alexander people were always struggling. Well, I'll just say I went to a lunch meeting once with a lot of Alexander teachers, and straight from that to a lunch meeting with youth workers, or the theatre youth workers. And I really, really noticed the difference in camaraderie and friendliness and support and that sort of thing. So I did leave Berlin with the question going on in my head, which is, why is something so wonderful and deep and really something that for me pulls the carpet out from under conflict? If you understand that your perception can be untrustworthy, that it is linked with your own thoughts, then I just had this question as to why that was happening. And so when I left Berlin, I was leaving Berlin with that question. And I think it motivates me a lot to understand that I don't believe there is such a thing as objectivity. You can't be objective.
Yeah.
So I very much, in training people here, I train people to say you are always a participant. In everything that you experience, you are only experiencing Gunda with that person, or the way that person is with Gunda in that moment. You're only experiencing, in a way, yourself in conjunction with.
Yeah.
And So that is something that motivated me when I left. And so it just didn't, shortly before I left Berlin, I went off to Findhorn to a peace conference.
Yeah.
And I had lots of questions. I was seeking to explore peace and how to work for peace in the world and that sort of thing. Very passionate about the technique. In fact, while there, I was at one point wanting to announce to everybody that the way to solve everything was the Alexander technique. But I also did see that wasn't only the case. There was a wonderful person there working with people from Northern Ireland and showing me that it's not just about thinking your neck free. She was creating a space for people to express the hurt that they'd experienced between the Protestants and Catholics. And I was sitting in the workshop going, we'll just tell them to think they're neck free. And then I experienced how beneficial it was that people could express things. And so I started to sort of explore a few other aspects as well. But it did take me to England in an indirect way half a year later, because at that Findhorn Peace Conference, there were two things that really, I would say, are very significant for me. One of them is that it was called May There Be Peace on Earth, the conference. And there was this guy who stood up and said, do you all realize that when you have the thought, may there be peace on earth, you are maintaining the thought that there isn't peace on earth. It's got may, and I went, that's my shoulders. It's so obsessive, isn't it, when you're into the technique? I was going, that's what I'm doing to my shoulders. I'm thinking, may they be free. I'm not thinking them free. So it really helped. I realized I wasn't just thinking free and then just trusting, So thinking it free and then letting go of the result rather than trying to check out what the result was. So that was a really key point. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other key point was that there was a little space where people could give workshops that hadn't been pre-planned. And I was giving a little Alexander technique workshop. And this couple came and took part. And they said, I was just getting them, taking the arm and somebody supporting, thinking that they could think. And they said, this has been the most important thing that we've experienced here at the conference. But you're not the only one doing this. There's this guy in a wheelchair who's a Zen teacher who teaches movement. And he got us to do exactly the same thing. So I found him. I went and found out who he was. And he was called Michael Mitchell. And he was a Zen teacher working with movement despite having been paralyzed in a car accident. So when I moved from Berlin, I moved to move in with Michael, because when I'd put my hands on Michael's legs where he couldn't move them and asked him to think, I could feel the neural pathway connection still happening. So I was convinced that there was something not dead in there. So I thought, well, how about I just give it 2 years of my life? And I go there and I just see if the technique could get that going again. I'm revealing what I'm like, aren't I? A bit spontaneous. But I went there with the idea of giving it 2 years of my life. And so that's what took me. I moved from Berlin and I moved to Shaftesbury in southwest England. But of course, it wasn't quite the way I thought, because what I discovered was that somebody who's handicapped, who's disabled, to keep such an active life like Michael had, it took every moment of the day to get him ready, to get him into the car, to get him to a workshop he was giving. And those were his survival strategies. So there was me saying, work with me 6 hours a day. We'll just think in for 6 hours. And he wasn't willing to do that. Yeah. And so I stayed about 3 months, and we it was Zen teaching and meditating in the mornings. And I learned a lot from him, because he wasn't a very perfect kind of guy. He would get quite angry at times. Very frustrating being so dependent on others. Yeah. But what he did was have this phrase, shift the energy. And if things had got on top of him, he would say, just wheel me up on top of the hill. There's a beautiful view. I need to shift the energy. And the other thing I really noticed is that however explosive a situation had been, it never carried on into the next moment. So it would be very imperfect, very messy, very human. But you never felt that there was a kind of lagging on of judgment or anything, And that's something I then came to recognize as why he was working with Zen teaching.
Yeah.
Not that he was managing to always be calm, but that he was managing never to hold one moment into the next moment. Does that make sense?
That makes very much sense.
Yeah.
As we as Alexander teachers also keep on reacting, but we might come back a bit more quickly.
Yes, we do. We have our reactions. We do that. And in a way, they can be survival things for us.
Exactly.
Or things we're attached to or whatever, or just we have a moment of overwhelm, or we just aren't in great conditions present for ourselves. The world is complex. But yes, so Michael really taught me that. Shift the energy. Change it.
Yeah.
Do stop. It's a form of stop, isn't it? An inhibition, really,
Yeah. Great.
So that was how I came from Berlin to England.
So you stayed there for 3 months, and how did the Alexander journey continue?
Yeah, so then I met the father of my children, and that was kind of in the area. So I then got a job in a health food shop for 3 days a week and began to build a practice. And then I reduced it to 2 days a week and reduced it to 1 day a week and then stopped completely. And by that time I'd built a practice that's in Dorset in a place called Shelburne, which was fascinating because Shelburne is a small place, but it's quite a wealthy place. It has a lot of schools, a lot of education. And it also has a very, very busy, active, retired population. So it was kind of good for the time when my children were small, because there were plenty of people who wanted the technique and plenty of people who had enough money to have lessons.
Perfect.
For a long time, I was only teaching people age 60 plus. And I really had to learn that the more complex a situation is, the less you do, not the more you do. The more you hold back and give it space to sort it out. Because I started off by finding myself trying harder, trying to give more. And I learned that from that. And then as I lived there, I did live there for a good 12 years, I think. As it evolved, younger people did come, and and then as my children got older, some of their parents, so it didn't stay just that older bracket. But it was challenging because also Shelburne is very close to Yeovil, which is a place with a lot of military background. It's Westlands. You've got the helicopter, so fighter pilots. Military men, people with very conservative views, when I'm actually, with my German English background, quite a sort of, peace-loving person, and very challenging, but very good to be teaching people of all sorts, not ideologically of the same ilk as myself at all. And that was quite good. Yeah, but basically I did have to finance us. And so because the father of my children, we weren't together, only the first year, and we already knew it wouldn't work. He had ME and wasn't really up to it. And therefore he was on disability living allowance, so he could not earn or was not providing any maintenance. I'm quite a believer in the fact that sometimes if you have to, it makes you really find a way,
Yeah.
It kept me very busy, and I always have been,
So that was the time when your children were relatively small.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I just kept on plugging away and thinking that was an okay thing to be doing for that time as an Alexander teacher too. What did come into that time is that I started working for the Bristol training course.
Oh.
Because when my kids were about 4, I think, I just felt that I was missing a bit of community of the Alexander world. I thought, well, I could just go and join in at the Bristol School sometimes, you know, just go and visit them. But something quite strange actually happened then, because I turned up on the first day and there was a very strange atmosphere. So Ali Burrows was kind of off in a corner dancing. She was dancing and dancing, you know, and everybody was studying and doing theory in another corner, you know. Okay. And I thought, what's happening? Something's going on here. And then I realized she was actually in the last month of her life, or month or 2 of her life. And I think it was the last day or so that she was in the school when I turned up. And so I realized that the situation was that they were down a teacher, but that obviously, Ali, you can't just take away somebody's pay. You know, how does a school, you know? So I just thought, well, I'm actually quite missing some company, so I'll just volunteer. And that's what I did. So I went in fairly frequently. And then Ali did die, but the week before she died, she sent me a card. Mm-hmm. I received this card in the post, and she paid me for every single hour I'd been in at the school. And she told Caroline to employ me. That's how I came to work at the Bristol School. It was really moving, because I didn't meet her apart from that time when she was dancing in the background, you know. But that's how I came to work at the Bristol School. So, which was really fun and really nice. I only worked there every 2 weeks as their voice person.
Oh, okay.
Once every 2 weeks.
For how long did you do that?
I think it was 3 years. It might have been a little bit more with the overlap with me going in, and you know, but it was 3 years properly employed. And the reason for that is that in the year after Ali died, nobody wanted to start training because they'd chosen Ali, you know?
Yeah.
So then a year later, there was a really big intake of 9 people at once, and they had about 4 or 5 already. So again, it was a school with about 14 people in it. And when they had that big intake of people, they needed more staff.
Yeah.
So, but equally, when the 9 had gone through, they returned to being quite a small school. So it was logical that myself and someone called Vivi, who was also, so Vivi, we took turns. So we were the first to go, basically, when they became a small school again. So I worked there for 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did this happen, this school?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'd always known that I enjoyed training people because of the experience of working in the Berlin school and then at the Bristol school. And then I was looking for a secondary school for my kids, and I knew where we were wasn't going to suit them. One of them had said they didn't want to go to the school there. So I researched all the schools around, and it just did so happen that the school that they liked was down in Devon. And there was no intention to work at Danny's school. I just was following what their needs were. And we moved down here, and I was sort of thinking, well, maybe when Danny stops training people, maybe I'll start one in Exeter.
So yeah. Danny came from Berlin here.
So Danny originally was from here. So Danny trained, this building that we're in, the mansion, has history. In the 70s and the early 80s, the whole of the top floor was an Alexander Technique School run by Jeanne and Axel, and then Jeanne and Jon, and then just Jeanne, I think. And Danny was Jeanne's assistant before he went out to Berlin. So Danny was from this area.
Oh, okay.
So, and Danny and I were still in touch. We have an anatomy conversation on the phone every now and then. But anyway, when I came down, I was thinking, well, at some point, Danny might stop in the future. I've still got quite young children. They're 11 by now, you know. When he stops, I'll consider opening a school in Exeter. And, you know, I was thinking along those lines. But actually, 1 year later, Sarah, Danny's partner, Sarah Pace, decided she wanted to retire. So I then became his named assistant. Because the thing about it is that not everybody had the required assistantship for the roles that STAT requires, you see. So it wasn't really intentional, but when it actually came to it, Danny and I knew each other very well already from Berlin times, but it was also just to do with fulfilling the STAT rules.
And that was in Exeter or here in Totnes?
That was here. That was at a beautiful place called Bowden House, which is on the outskirts of Totnes. So I was Danny's named assistant.
When did that happen?
2014. I think I became his named assistant. Yeah. So that's how that happened. And really, it wasn't something I was expecting to happen.
Okay.
But it just did. And it made sense, you know.
Great. And when did you then take over?
So then we had the situation where Danny had a stroke. And he says it was 2016. I think it was 2017, but I'm not certain. But whenever it was, it is the situation that the named assistant has to step up in that, you know. And so there was a period of time, probably about a term, when I was fully running the school then. And then Danny came back and was working, but did have some of his left side was, you know, he still had a bit of a limp, and he was doing amazingly. It was still a very inspiring time when he came back for the trainees, but it wasn't a time without disability going on in the room. So there began to be discontent amongst the trainees. People were saying, you need to take it over, you know. And I was saying, it's not the way I kind of work. But in the end, what I did was write Danny a letter and just say, let's swap. I'll be the head, you be the named assistant. Because Danny was kind of unable to sustain the whole day's energy, you know, the whole 3 hours energy and so on. But then when it came to it, actually STAT didn't allow Danny to be the named assistant. Rightly so. Because they said, if you're the named assistant, if something happens to the head, you need to be in a position to take it over, exactly as I'd had to. You know? And so you wouldn't be in a position if something happened to Gunda. So you can't really be in that role. So that didn't actually happen. So
it was probably hard for him.
I think in the end, it was so interesting. It was a really good example of the technique because he clearly read the letter, did lots of stop, and then just said, oh, yeah, you're right. You know, so it wasn't very dramatic in the end.
Okay.
And so then I took on Sarah and got Linda Jordan out of retirement to be my named assistants. So 2 very experienced teachers alongside. And then we had the pandemic. We had the pandemic. It changed a lot, didn't it, for a lot of people?
How did you survive the pandemic or the school?
Well, that's where the connection with the Bristol School helped, because the Bristol School under Caroline carried on working online a lot. What I did was go to something like a third of the hours just to keep people going. And we did lots of exchanges with heads of training around the world online and just inspiring things, or looking into things like what somatic experiencing was and how it linked, and studying some anatomy and some theory, and, you know.
But online.
And because we weren't allowed to put hands on. I got another job because I do not have other means, and I worked in child assault prevention, going into primary schools. Back to my theatre background, we were putting on little plays, teaching children how to work with bullying, safety online, safety with strangers, and sexual assault. And I learned a lot. I did it for 14 months.
Wow.
And I learned a lot from that, because we had a thing called review time, where you're asking the children to come talk to you if there is something going on in their lives, and sometimes there really was. And so we really had to learn how to deal with that situation and how to listen in a way that you're not writing notes, but you're remembering every word.
Yeah.
And you do not write anything that's your own opinion. You write child said this, child said that. So you're talking about a very strong listening skill and a very accurate listening skill. And inhibition was hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Especially when they'd come out to talk to you, and I would just they were about to leave, and I'd say, is there anything else? And that's when they'd invariably tell you what they really came out for. So the technique was very helpful. But it was a moving experience, and one I wouldn't miss.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't miss it. So, but the Bristol School and I linked online. That's where just to take it back to that. We Caroline and I sometimes ran things where one of us was fronting the Zoom, so that we weren't both working quite so hard. Yeah. And then at some point, Caroline said, "There's no point in both schools going under. I feel like stopping. I'm going to stop, and you can finish off the people that I've still got." And that's why we have a Bristol branch to our school here. Yeah, we made it through. So, and we did, as like everybody, have a gap with not enough people starting. And I think we still feel that. We still are smaller than we would have been without the pandemic.
Yeah.
And
maybe we can come a little bit towards the content of the Alexander technique. And what is the most important aspect of it for you at the moment, maybe?
Yeah, I like the at the moment, because there are always sort of phases, aren't there, where you find something particularly important, and then, or things come around and then they come around again. I think I really do love the sense of wonder that this manages itself when you get out the way, and that it's not the same thing as controlling it. It's actually the paradox that you get more control by surrendering your control over it. And that paradox, I think, is what is the most important for me. In fact, holding two things simultaneously is very important to me. But obviously, I mean, I really do, down Danny's line, have a lot of sense of the mechanics and how we're even managing to stand up, how that even works, you know. But the philosophical side to it is deeply, deeply important. And I think, like I said, the idea of you never being able to be an objective person, you know. The other thing that's very important for me is lack of perfectionism, actually. Yeah. You can probably tell when you talk to me, you know, I don't work in that way, because having parented as a single parent, twins and so on, I remember thinking, we used to say all these children are always so, you know, look at them, look at their good use. But children really have tantrums. Children really have storms. you know. So I'm not very good on the idea that we should always be quiet and calm.
No,
I'm more along the lines of that we work with ourselves and to find it again if we lose it.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Sort of happy muddle.
Yeah.
Human beings are messy.
And recovering more quickly.
Yeah, and recovering more quickly. Exactly, because if you have a moment when you've experienced overwhelm, that actually you can be fine again a short moment later.
Yeah.
You know, and be able to let it go. You know, I think that's more important to me, that aspect of it. And
not losing spontaneity.
Not losing spontaneity. I'm very big on that, because that's just who I am. You know, I don't think I can lose that theatre-y background that I do have, theatre director-y background. I do find things funny all the time. And I do think that natural humour emerges from inhibition, and natural spontaneity emerges from inhibition for creative people, you know? And I think in a way, we're all creative and we're all kind of improvising our lives all the time.
Yeah.
You know? So, but that's just what's coming out at the moment. There are so many aspects of the technique that you could talk about, obviously.
But you've been working with artists all your life.
Yes.
So how do you see the connection between Alexander technique and the arts, or creative people and people who are drawn towards the Alexander technique?
Yeah, I mean, what I would really say is that goes back to that idea of spontaneity. People often think they're being spontaneous when they're being habitual. And they sometimes think they're not attracted to the Alexander technique because they think it has this aspect of self-control and so on, and then they wouldn't be spontaneous. But that's just not understanding it deeply enough.
Yeah.
So basically that's because they don't really know what inhibition is. Because if you ask somebody to do workshops, theatre workshops, and ask them to be spontaneous, the likelihood is that if you had filmed them and you'd filmed them 5 years before, they might be saying the same thing. It would be coming around and around. But that doesn't happen with the technique. So if you are inhibiting, it emerges from this moment. And actually, this moment is always interesting.
Yeah.
So if you see an actor deciding how to say a line and then trying to regurgitate it, saying it the way they've practiced, it won't be interesting. If you teach actors to listen, and to listen as though they've never heard before the line the actor says before, they'll say it fresh and new, and it will be new and fresh because this moment is new and fresh.
Yeah.
So there's something fundamentally to do with finding genuine creativity that the technique does. Honestly, it's really deeply linked with, you know?
Yeah.
But it's not always easy for people to find out what that really is, you know? You know, I've really noticed, for example, talking to people who work in drama schools, that sometimes the other movement teachers think, no, just not that Alexander technique. They all walk around with a stick. I mean, this is not where you should look when you're an actor acting things. But that's mainly because people are in a kind of early stage of understanding how to be, so that they don't realize that the grammar isn't speaking the language, or scales aren't making music.
Yeah.
So we too often get associated with what people look like when they are maybe practicing the grammar or practicing the scales, rather than all the swivels and the range that you can do, you know. And then people don't know that they're looking at somebody on the journey rather than somebody who's really, really, you know, really working with it, you know?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other questions?
Yes. As we're at it, maybe you can define inhibition a little bit, a brief definition.
Yes.
Because the term is a bit unfortunate.
Yes, it is. So there are two things I would just come spontaneously to mind. There's so much, but I think so many experienced teachers have tried to get at this creation of a genuine gap between your response. So when you hear something, you allow yourself to hear it without any need for a response to it, so that it's definitely not going in that direction of any kind of suppression. So if you like, mind the gap, you know, you're creating that gap that opens up the possibility of choice. That is something I would like to talk about, because I do think people get really scared when they genuinely inhibit, because it opens up choice. I just need to throw in, was at one point very interested in the teachings of a guy called William Glasser, choice theory. And I don't know that I agree with everything he said, but what I picked up was he talked about the difference between external control and internal control. And he did a lot of doing things like turning around failing schools or working with failing marriages and things like that. External control for him is when you are looking for a tick from the outside or a star or you're getting the marks, you're getting a reward or you're getting your pay, your money. Internal control for him is when you're learning. It's all about learning. You're learning because something interests you. So the reward is intrinsic to the act of learning, just because you are interested, rather than because you're looking for somebody to smile at you that you did well, or to tick that you did well. So I think when you inhibit and you find that gap, you have choices. You can genuinely choose how you react in the next moment. But if we're all survivors of an external control education, where the teachers have been telling you that what you did was okay and so on, I'm not sure people are very good at the internal control way of being, which is learning for its own interest or for their own sake.
Yeah.
So because I think we are all survivors of that kind of upbringing, maybe our parents or maybe school or the way, being praised, or that can have internalized itself. So the external control is now inside us, and we're splitting ourselves in two. And we've got one side of ourselves watching the other side, giving it a tick or a cross, a right or a wrong, or all of that. That's internalized external control thinking. So when you really learn inhibition, you end up in a situation where you are reclaiming your own autonomy. You are reclaiming your choice. You then need to be capable of making choices. And you need to, what are you going to base that on? If you don't have some kind of idea about what you might base that on, what you might choose. And I think that's a danger moment in this technique. So when people learn inhibition, they also need to learn how to take choices and how to, how to not look for a right choice.
Yeah.
That basically there's just a different one or a different one often. And you just go with it and have an experience somehow. And I think it frightens people. So what happens is that real inhibition moment that opens up choice is something that people can find quite scary.
Yeah.
And it's understandable that that's the case, actually.
Or the realization that if we are habitual beings, what is actually left when I'm not in my habits? I had a moment in my training when I thought, what's left?
Yes. Well, what's left, I'm just going to say to you, which people will, because I'm quite fast. You've probably noticed I'm talking quite a lot. I'm quite fast. But the thing is, you can kind of be playful. You can be behaving in a way that is your personality without being so attached to it.
Yeah.
So for me, the inhibition, it's kind of gone through and out the other end, where it's almost like you're living your personality, your background, you can't escape what your parents taught you and, but you can live it with less attachment to it. Yeah. You can live it with a sense of humor at yourself.
Yeah.
You can live it knowing that that's just one way. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And you can actually quite enjoy it. It's a bit like acting, isn't it? You're acting that. So it's quite interesting to look at what inhibition really does or offers.
Yeah.
Never ending, isn't it?
Never ending.
And always interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Can we maybe stop with just a very brief, in a nutshell, what is the Alexander technique? The most dreaded question.
Yeah. What is the Alexander technique? Well, yeah, I have to stop, you see, because that is a big question, isn't it? What is it really? The obvious one is obviously what Alexander said, how to deal with a stimulus that puts us wrong. But I think maybe it's more learning to allow things to emerge, actually, things to occur, and in the sense of allowing this to function, but also allowing your life to unfold, or the moments to unfold, and like surfing the wave. So it's actually how to live creatively in a way where you're not going to regret when you're lying on your deathbed, have I lived my life? Because what you were doing was surfing and going along with the flow of life, rather than swimming against it. So I would say probably at the moment, it would change tomorrow, it would change in an hour. But probably at the moment, I would say it's learning how to live life gracefully, creatively, in a way that is actually embracing what it is to live life. Something along those lines.
Yeah. I like surfing the wave.
Surfing the wave of life.
Because you can't control the wave. You have to kind of go with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when things go wrong in my day or in my life in general, I tend to say, where were you end gaining? Because there is always, I would say actually always, when things are not flowing and there is always you can be a detective and go, I really was end gaining there. Look at that. I was pushing that, or I did have a preconceived idea. I was trying to gain that end rather than just going. And that is really interesting that it seems that when you are flowing with it, it doesn't even matter. I'm not even talking about having just good experiences. I'm talking about even in the most hardest, which I have experienced a lot of with my parents, lots of ill health, even in those moments when you are going with the flow, there is something really precious and diamond-like about it. When you're fighting it, it's hard. It's all hard, So it's something like that. So you're going with the flow.
Thank you so much, Gunda.
Oh, thank you. I feel like I've talked a mile a minute, but that's kind of who I am.
That's fantastic. And of course, we could continue for hours and hours.
Of course we could.
Yeah.
There's never enough to say about such an amazing technique. And I think that is what everybody will have in common.
Yeah.
Who discovers the technique, that it's so enriching.
Yes. Definitely.
For our lives.
Yeah. And for everybody, it's different. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I hope to impart that to my trainees on the training course, more than anything, that they become who they are, but they are basically surfing their own wave.
Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.